Hi there, thanks for joining me again. I'm so excited to show you how I constructed my little wall hanging in this video. Now, I've mentioned before that my feature is pivot position. What is pivot position and how does it help us? Well, pivot position on the Baby Lock Destiny 2 acts like a third set of hands. The way that it works is when you've got it activated, every time you stop stitching, your needle is going to come down and your presser foot will lift up. Your needle acts as an anchor, holding your fabrics in position so that you can make adjustments to the fabrics or your hands as needed without losing your space where you are stitching. What's nice about that is without using pivot position, sometimes the needle will stop in the up position, the foot will be down, you've got to lift your foot up and move your fabrics, and your fabric shifts beneath the needle and there's nothing holding it in place. And it can cause you to have an extra long or a skipped or even a crooked stitch. So using pivot position really allows you greater control as you sew because you can stop, maneuver your fabric or your hands, and then it automatically drops that foot again when you begin to sew, and you just keep on sewing without losing your spot. Now, this is a Quilt As You Go project, and I've already partially constructed it here. I've got a big piece of batting, and I've got my beautiful in the center. I've added my first sashing piece. I've added my first dress, and I've also got one of my border pieces on top here, and that's kind of anchoring it all together for me. Let me show you how I constructed that. I'm simply going to rotate this around, and I like to just fold up my extra batting just to kind of get it out of the way a little bit. I love that I've got this huge sewing space on my Baby Lock Destiny 2. I've got lots of room to work here from the needle to the side of the machine. So what I'm going to do is position my next sashing strip. I've got my pretty little 2.5 inch piece here. I'm going to put it right sides down so that it lines up right along, there we go, my center panel here. And you can add a couple of pins if you like. I think that my Destiny feeds really well, so I don't very often use pins, but you can if it makes you feel better. So there we go. So now I'm going to position the 1/4 inch guide on my foot right along the edge of my fabric. Now first, let's activate pivot position. Pivot position is this icon here on the screen that looks like a needle and a presser foot. Now along with my pivot position, I'm also going to activate my automatic tie-off and trim. What that's going to do for me is at the end of my seam, I simply touch the reverse key and the machine will automatically lock in my stitches, cut my threads, and it's going to do something extra special because I have pivot position activated. So I've got the 1/4 inch foot on, but it's not the 1/4 inch foot that comes with the Destiny. The one that comes with the Destiny has a little guide on the side of it. And I feel that when I'm stitching and batting like this, sometimes it catches. So I like this accessory foot that does not have the guide. I'm all ready to stitch, so let's start to sew here. There we go. Coming up on a pin, so I'm going to stop. And look at that, the presser foot automatically comes right up, the needle stays down, and I can easily remove that pin. Automatically drops again when I begin to sew. There we go, I'm going to stop before I get to that next pin. And because I've got my machine in my cabinet, all the excess fabric just extends right to the edge. I'm stitching in a perfectly flat spot. There we go, take that last pin out. All right, I'm at the end of my seam, so I'll touch reverse as I'm sewing. It's locking in my stitch. Cut my threads, and it lifted the presser foot. How awesome is that? So when you have pivot position activated and turn on your automatic tie off and trim, it's also going to lift your foot up for you, which I really like. Now I'm going to give this a good finger press open. If I were having a little more time here, I would go ahead and iron it because I am using a fusible batting, but I'm just going to give it a good sturdy finger press. And now I'm going to add my next dress. I've got to make sure it's facing the same direction as the one above it. Place this on, once again, right sides together. I'm lining up the edge of my turquoise piece with the raw edge of that last sashing strip I just stitched on. I'll put a couple pins in there. Keep everything straight as I sew. And now, I'll lower my foot and stitch the seam. Once again, I'm going to stop before I get to my pin. I hear some people say that it's okay to sew over pins. I really don't agree with that. You definitely want to make sure that you stop before you get to your pins because you can break your needles and you can also knock the machine out of timing. Now, if you have the love of sewing membership with your Destiny, which I encourage for everybody, it'll get fixed for free for those first 4 years, but you really want to avoid that. I really don't think it's a good idea to sew over pins. So we'll continue stitching. Coming up on that other pin, so I'll stop, my foot comes right up, it's gonna go right back down. And once again, I'm gonna activate that tie off. Cut, and my presser foot lifts. Absolutely love that. And on my Baby Luck Destiny, that thread cutter cuts every single time. Absolutely love it. So now I can smooth this down. Then again, I would give it a good press. And then you're simply going to continue adding on your border pieces. After you've sewn on your 3 turquoise pieces and your 2 sashings, then you do this little inner border. These are cut 1 1/4 inch, so you just get a little 3/4 inch pink pop of color there. I felt like it would kind of pull out the accent color that I'd used. Then you put it on your sides, and then you put on that outer border, which for mine was the quarter foil, in the same process. I add all of that on right through my batting. So I'll go ahead and stitch this guy on. Make sure everything's nice and straight. These are all 9.5 inch pieces, so real quick and easy to cut too. There we go, just use 1 pin there. Lower my foot. Make sure it's nice and straight. There we go. Ooh, got a little crooked there. Pull out that pin. And almost to the end of my seam, lock in those stitches. Perfect. Now we can simply open this up and press it down. The reason that I, in this construction of this project, added my sashing pieces and my first border before I stitched on my applique pieces was simply to support the edges. I felt that by securing the edges, it kept anything from puckering inside. Now I've got a lot of stabilizer in here with my fusible applique underneath of my dresses and the fusible batting, so I shouldn't have to worry about things puckering as I stitch, but I always like to be really mindful of that and make sure that it doesn't happen. Now because these portions are fused up here, I'm going to turn it around. And I'd like to show you next how we can use pivot position and a decorative stitch to applique the dress down. So first of all, I'm going to change the foot. Instead of using my 1/4 inch foot, this time, and I keep all my extra feet up in the lid of my Destiny, I'm going to use my clear applique foot, or excuse me, my clear open toe foot. It's got a cutout in the center, which is going to make it really easy for me to see where I'm sewing. And this is a snap-on foot. There we go. And now, I want to select a blanket stitch. There are a lot of different stitches that people use for applique. You can use a little zigzag stitch, you can tighten up your zigzag stitch, make it a real short stitch length and real narrow, and then you have what we call a satin stitch, also very popular for applique. I like to use the blanket stitch. That's what I used on my little dresses. And it almost makes like a little backwards E shape. And that can be found in my quilting set of stitches. I have my Destiny programmed so that when I turn it on, it automatically brings me into what's called the Q menu, all of the built-in quilting stitches. Those are what I use the most. The machine comes with a default setting of taking you into what we call the utility stitch menu. Here it is, where you see all of your straight stitches, zigzags, your side cutter and piecing stitches, a lot of the most common utility type sewing. But I set mine, because my Destiny is very customizable, to turn on to the quilting menu. I'm going to select stitch Q-14, and that's a little blanket stitch. It's going to have a straight stitch down the side, and then it takes little bites to the left with each stitch. Now, it defaults to a 3.5 stitch length, which is just a little bit longer than what I want for what I'm stitching. So I'm going to shorten my stitch length. I'm going to take that down to a 2.5, and you can see the changes happening right on screen. I'm also going to make it a little bit more narrow. Excuse me, the width is 2.5. I'm going to make the length 2.0. There we go. So now I've got a real tight, tiny little blanket stitch. I also like to utilize the needle guide beam as I'm sewing because it gives me that straight line around where I'm stitching. So I'm going to activate that too, which is this icon here. I can see on screen that the guide beam goes to the center needle position, 3.5. It tells me right here that it's at 3.5 within my 7mm opening on the foot. So that's center needle position. But the backbone or the straight edge of my blanket stitch is not lined up with it because it does not stitch right down the very center of the foot. but I can make it do that. And the reason I like to do that is because then the center of my blanket stitch is going to be right at the very center of my foot. And visually, I find that a little bit easier to work with. So what we have on the Destiny here is the ability to change the left-right shift. That moves the entire stitch within that 7mm stitch opening without changing the size of the stitch, which I love. So I'm going to move that over, and what I'm looking for on screen here is for my blue line, which is the backbone of my blanket stitch, to be lined up directly on top of the red line, which is the guide beam. So we'll watch that happen here. And we see the stitch moving. There we go. At 1.5, I can see that they're perfectly aligned. So I've got the guide beam illuminated on my fabric here, and I am going to slowly lower my needle just to make sure that my very first stitch is going to start right on the edge of my applique piece. I want the blanket or the backbone of my blanket to stitch right along the edge, and the bites are just going to come inside. Now that guide beam is going to run in a straight line, so it's not going to be perfectly straight as we go around the curves. But as I'm coming around this larger piece of the dress, I find that it's helpful to keep me straight. So I've got my pivot position activated. I have my automatic tie off and trim activated. So now I know that I'll be able to pivot around my shape as I stitch without losing my spot, and it will lock in my stitches at the beginning and the end of my seam. So I'll lower the foot. Gotta use my hand lever. There we go, and we're good to go. So there's that first locking stitch, and it goes forward and backward and then over to the left, forward and backward and then over to the left. So you want to make sure that you get a feel for the rhythm of any stitch that you're using when you're appliquing. Forward and backward and over to the left. See that? And then when I stop, my needle goes down, my foot comes up, and I can pivot gently around the curve. And I'm just keeping that guide beam right along the edge of my applique fabric. Slower is better, especially when you're practicing getting your needle position correct. So just keep going around. There we go. This is the easy part because it's a nice long curve. And as you get a feel for it and feel more confident, you can speed up a little bit. There we go. Now keep in mind, if you have a hard time keeping your speed consistent, you've got adjustable speed control on your Destiny, so you can slow that right down, especially if you tend to be a lead foot driver. There we go. So I'm going to just get right down the curved edge of this dress here. There we go. And I'm gently maneuvering the fabric as I stitch. This is the easier edge. Oh, there we go. Okay, now I'm going to stop. I like to make sure that every time I stop on that outer backbone of the stitch, and then I'm going to pivot gently around my curve and keep working around. Now when you get to the scallopy hem on the dress, you may find that you've got to stop more frequently and move that fabric even more. You can move the fabric a little bit as you sew, but not significant moves. And now I'm getting close to the corner. This is part of the reason why keeping a shorter stitch length helps, because it allows you to pivot faster. I'm getting real close to the corner. There's my side stitch. And I'm going to stitch right up into the corner. Back, side, and I think I've got room for one more little stitch. There we go. Now, before it takes its stitch to the side, I have stopped and pivoted. I'm going to pivot right in that right edge stitch and allow it to take its stitch to the side in the new direction. And that just kind of looks nice in the corner. So just kind of experiment. Take an extra dress piece, attach it to a piece of background fabric, and just kind of experiment and play with positioning and pivoting and when in the stitch is the best time to do that. So take your time, stitch slowly, and you'll probably find that the more you do, the more confident you become, and then you might start to speed up your stitching a bit. I'm going to come around this last curve here. Here we go. And I want to show you what happens when I touch the locking stitch. So I've told the machine that I want it to do an automatic tie off and trim. And in order for the machine to know when I'm ready for it to do that, I'm going to touch the reverse key as I sew. It's locking in, cut my thread, and now it lifts the foot. Anytime that you activate automatic tie off and trim when you're in pivot position, your machine is also going to lift the foot for you, and then you're ready just to pull your fabric right away. So you would continue stitching your dress pieces down using your blanket stitch very carefully, and then you're ready to start on the lettering. Now I've switched to a variegated thread that matches the color of my lettering. I love using a variegated thread for this because it just adds a little bit of texture, and it also kind of helps to hide some of the stitching. For this particular portion of the applique, doing that blanket stitch around all these tiny little curves would be a bit of a challenge, so I'm just going to switch to a straight stitch. So I'm going back to Q-01, which is a standard straight stitch, and I'm going to leave automatic tie off and trim and pivot position activated. Now I'm keeping on the open toe applique foot, but I'm going to turn off the needle guide beam because I'm going to be circling around quite a bit. So try and think about which direction you would like to start stitching. I'm going to start right at the very top of this little flourish that comes down and becomes the B. So I've kind of positioned the fabric around. I'll lower the foot and then just make sure that it's exactly where I want it to be. And now I'm going to start stitching, and it's going to lock my stitches in because the last time I stopped, I used the automatic tie off. And then the machine knows that it wants you to lock, or that you want it to lock the stitches back in again at the beginning. I've taken just a couple of stitches, and now to follow this curve, I've got to do some pretty substantial pivoting here. Now you want to try and avoid making sharp edges and, like corners. Just take a little, as small of a turnaround as you can. But sometimes with these big curves, you do find that you've got to take a pretty substantial pivot. Now for the excess of this fabric, it's kind of getting caught in my lap a little bit, so I'm simply going to roll it up, and that's going to allow me to continue moving around, and I can just pivot all of this excess right into the big sewing space on my destiny here. So I'm coming around, pivot again, and then maybe stop and trim your threads, get rid of those excess threads that are in the way there. They're a lot easier to stop and take out now than to try and rip out after they've gotten stitched into your sewing. There we go. So just continue pivoting around. Now you could switch to a smaller straight stitch. I am on Q-01, which is a 2.0 millimeter straight stitch. And to me, I think that looks exactly right. I had switched to a slightly smaller straight stitch just to see what it looked like, and the stitches looked just a little bit too close together. They were a little too stacked on top of each other for my personal preference. I'm gonna fold this edge up a little bit. But when you work with a shorter stitch length, like a 2.0 versus even a 2.5, it really gives you the ability to stop faster and pivot more often. So you might find that you like the results a little bit better if you're working with a little smaller straight stitch. So we can just keep going down and around. There we go. And if you need to stop and kind of plan where your next stitches go, you can do that at any point as you stitch. Taking that extra time just to make sure that you feel comfortable about your stitching and where you're stitching definitely will lead to a better result in the end project. There we go. So now I'm ready to work back up the other side of the B. I've come around this little flourish and down, and then it's time to come back up the other side of the B. Now it's not a bad idea when you're doing this type of stitching just to kind of trace it with your finger before you get started. Just get a feel for the direction that you're going to follow, because I'm kind of crossing over my stitching a little bit and following different directions along the letters as I stitch. So I'll keep on going here. And if you make a mistake and don't follow the path you were originally intending to, no one's ever going to know. There we go. So just keep pivoting around. And again, when you get close to the edge, make sure you stop and pivot again. There we go. I'm just going to come down this curve of the B. So you can see, you can just keep on going all the way around those letters, pivoting as necessary. Now I'm going to go ahead and lock in my stitch and stop. And there we have it. So I've completed the top portion of the B. So fun, relaxing, just enjoy the process. But again, just kind of get a feel for what direction you want to follow as you stitch around. I kind of stopped and started with a few of the letters, like I did the B to here, and then I started on my E and just came around and stopped and followed the Y and stopped. So just take a little bit of time to plot out your stitching. Now I'd like to show you how I used pivot position to actually quilt this together. So let me switch to my digital dual feed foot real quick. Okay, so I've switched to my digital dual feed and I've got the standard sole on, but I'm going to take that off and put on the open toe sole. I love this foot because it gives me that great walking foot. It's better than a walking foot because it's belt driven. It never leaves contact with the fabric. And I can see exactly where I'm going to stitch. And what I want to stitch this time is when you have completed your entire project, you're going to add the backing to it and then do some quilting just to stitch the backing to the batting and the front portion. Now I haven't done that yet because I haven't completed stitching this entire piece, but I just want to show you how I use my digital dual feed. And this time I'm going to turn the guide beam on once again. I've got a straight stitch selected and I want to stitch right inside the ditch here between my dress piece and my sashing. Lower the foot, and I'm just going to follow right along, but I can see exactly where that needle is landing at with every single stitch to make sure that I have basically invisible stitching. You could use a thicker contrasting thread here just for a little bit of a pop of color. You could also stitch right onto the green portion if you wanted to make it look kind of top stitched, but I decided to go with more of an invisible look. So with every single stitch, I'm just kind of continuing on. And whenever I start to feel like I need to reposition my hands or my fabric, I'll simply stop, my foot lifts, and I can make any little adjustments that I need to without losing my spot. Then I'll just continue on. And you can go all the way down your seam. This foot also has a little marking in the very back of the foot. I'm going to lift the needle just so that you can see. Right back here that shows me where the center needle position is. And I kind of keep an eye on that as I stitch so that I can see that I'm staying nice and straight in the ditch of my seam there. I feel that for me, this is a little bit more precise than using the stitch in the ditch foot. There is a great stitch in the ditch sole available for the digital dual feed. It has a little flange that follows right along the ditch, but sometimes I feel like I get a little bit crooked because I can't see as well. This helps me a lot. So we'll lock in. There we go. And I have absolutely perfectly straight stitching, completely invisible. You can't even see it. But what this would do, and again, this would be on your final construction with your backing in there, it just adheres the backing to the front and the batting so that if you end up washing your wall hanging for any particular reason, or just so that as it hangs on the wall, your fabrics stay together as gravity kind of does its work on the fabric. I hope you've enjoyed following along with me on my creative journey in the Baby Lock Love of Sewing Challenge. I think that you'll find that you use pivot position a lot, whether you're stitching straight stitches, decorative stitches, applique. I use it all the time for my stitching. I hope that you have been inspired by this challenge and all 12 of us that get to participate in it, that you'll make the most of your destiny. If you haven't gotten one and you've been thinking about it, I know that you're going to love this machine. I absolutely love mine. It's a joy to have in my sewing studio. And it's been really special to be able to share a little bit of my personal sewing space with all of you. Thanks for watching. Be sure to visit me at sewpositivelysara.com for more inspiration and tips, and check out my latest videos at sewathomeclasses.com.